How is it, Chris?
I'm rolling.
Yeah.
This is my favorite time.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay, so Tom,
Yes.
you were playing Bob Maples, which is
Right. Who's the sheriff of Washita County?
in Texas.
What's Central City?
Well, it's Central City,
Central City.
Texas, of Washita County. He was a county sheriff. Yeah.
And it was a really small town in which you had the strongest relationship in that town with the lead character,
Right.
Lou Ford.
I always thought of Bob Maples as Lou Ford's father figure after his father died. I always thought of myself knowing him from his boyhood and his being left fatherless and parentless, really, at a fairly young age. So I always felt that I had taken over as his father figure.
And also you were keeping an eye on him.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the backstory is that there was an incident that was an insightful incident when the son was young.
Right.
When your deputy sheriff, Lou Ford, played by Casey Affleck,
Right.
was young.
That had maybe been blamed on his brother, who was an adopted brother, Michael, who we never see in our story, our part of the story. He's referred to, he's spoken about. And there was an incident involving a young girl, and it was questionable as to who was the guilty party. I prefer to believe it wasn't Lou.
Oh, that's interesting.
I chose not to believe anything bad about this kid.
Right. So in many ways the audience experiences the story through your eyes because you're the one that loves the main character and has kept an eye on him since he was a boy. And there's a big surprise at the end for you personally that is very hard for your character to take. How did you play that scene when you found out? We can't really talk about the bad story that you found out about in the town. But when you'd reached your end, your limits, what do you think your character was feeling at the most emotional point in the story?
Absolute devastation and disbelief, shock, horrible psychological pain. I just think I didn't ever want to accept that as being the truth. On top of that, I was being humiliated as well by a corrupt, powerful man in the community that really manipulated people in government, people in business, people in society. And I saw the end of my rope as well. All I had really was my job and this kid.
So in many ways
I mean, I had a wife, you know, but my whole belief system was wrapped up in my job and the boy.
And you took responsibility for the damage he did in the town.
After I found out that it was possible, then I think the worst part of it is that I had to withhold that information from him and lie to him, deceive him, thinking maybe it wasn't true.
So it's a tremendous story of suspense. And in some ways, I'm wondering if it's a bit reminiscent of the movie Psycho, but more taken apart moment by moment, the psychology of the main character before he erupts, the small town setting, the way that everybody's suspensefully watching, trying to catch up, but yet this person's able to get away with everything. So
if this person really was the guilty party and all evidence pointed to the fact that it was horrific. I mean, this is a monster
Yeah.
allowed to be let loose, partly being my fault. You know, by not seeing certain signals way before the worst nightmares come true. I should have seen it.
Right.
If it's true. I still don't want to believe it's true.
And it sort of is a cautionary tale in some ways about how when a town takes care of its own and decides that they have the strength and power and the authority to keep an eye on someone who is a bad egg.
It's almost incestuous. You know, you're not objective. It becomes like a lot of small towns. As I grew up in, you know too much about everyone. Everybody knows too much about you. And you lose your objectivity. I mean, what we found out as we got older is that there were sexual deviance, you know, incest within families that nobody ever talked about, nobody ever wanted to believe, nobody ever would accept the possibility of that. That seems to happen when the community you live in gets smaller and closer together. You know, you're only responsible to one another, and you do have almost absolute power over people's behavior.
And in the end, the belief system of the whole town is really what's disappeared, because they've lost faith in that concept of being a carefully manicured town in which they can have control over its citizens. And that really, because it took one of the main characters of the town who'd been a couple generations there, and the fact that that person was able to turn into a criminal, I think meant that the town itself was destroyed in many ways. He took the town out with him.
Of course, you know.
He took you out and he took the town out, right?
It's like Columbine, you know, that's within a small community of people. How does something on a bigger scale, it's like Nazi Germany. I mean, how does a town become so sick that they lose all perspective on who they are? And like we see now in modern times, you know, religious cults approve of any kind of deviance because all is forgiven. We decide who's guilty and who's righteous.
And who can stay around and who can't, and who can be watched and who can't, has to be put away.
I think if raising a kid in a small town, people move to a suburb to raise a kid and they all hang out at the 7-Eleven. If you're raising a kid in New York City, they have their choice of cultural opportunities. They might not take the right path, but they have a choice. In a small community, what is there to do? Drink, do drugs. Now, these days, methamphetamine becomes a way of life. You know, in an earlier time, as this story takes place in the 50s, too much alcohol, too much indulgence of things for lack of anything better to do. What do you do?
And what was it like working with Michael Winterbottom? Because as I recall, Casey Affleck was the first person cast, and I think you were pretty much in as the second person. It
was far back before we were able to actually go to work. It was early on. I liked him from the very beginning. Well, I liked his movies immensely before I ever met him. And I liked him immediately. I liked the way we worked in the audition process, you know, where you felt you had the freedom to discover and mark your performance without feeling that you had to have an end result. That doesn't happen in most auditions. It's set up for an immediate kind of instant pudding performance, like you have to have finished performance, there's nowhere to go after that.
Right,
So you
right.
felt like you were just marking your performance in terms of what it could grow up to be. But then when we went to work, the fact that he doesn't have a continuity supervisor ever means all rules are abandoned or they're completely non-existent. So you feel the freedom. You don't know where the camera is much of the time, and you're not concerned with it, and you're not self-conscious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a combination of working strictly with the text, improvising around the text, and lifting from the book.
You were lifting from the book, I
Yeah.
saw that.
Yeah.
You had the book in your back pocket, and it was still open territory.
Yeah.
Even while you were shooting.
Yeah, sometimes he would suggest passages from the book. Sometimes Casey would. Sometimes I would just go into it. And if he didn't stop me, just keep going.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, I think actors, you know, the worst thing in the world is direction that tells you how to do something, because, okay, now you got a signpost, you got to hit that mark every time. It's in your head, psychologically, in your head. Okay, you got to say this at this particular time with a certain kind of emphasis and punctuation. Bullshit. You know, we should never know exactly where we're going as long as we are filled up with the information that is true to the story. I think the only kind of direction that is really valid is questions. You know, if a director keeps asking you questions, you have to keep looking for answers.
Yeah.
If he knows how to ask the right questions, eventually you'll come up with the answers that serve the story, serve the writer.
And did you know the book, The Killer Inside Me,
Yeah.
or Jim Thompson?
Yeah. Yeah.
What? What's wrong?
There's no tape.
What do you mean?
We have no tape.
How far did we get? Okay, let's check it. You said the tape was empty.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't rewound.
You're kidding. Are you kidding? Let's,
I just put it.
can we check it? Let's see how far it went. Oh, you've got that, but still. Yeah, I know, but still.
There's no reason to waste time.
Okay, okay. All right. That's why I like to start with a new tape. Always do.
Well,
I should have done it. Yeah.
rewound.
I think that one had most of it. As I checked, and then I suddenly stopped.
It probably has all of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, it's
Okay.
fine.
Okay. So, let me think. Okay. So, with the director, oh, sorry, with Jim Thompson, did you know his work beforehand?
I did,
Because he was
yeah.
such a well-known entity at a certain point in
From
Hollywood.
way back. You know, I guess I'm a child of the 50s and started reading the Amboy Dukes and Mickey Spillane, and then get into James Cain. And then early on, Jim Thompson with the Grifters, The Getaway, Population 1280, The Killer Inside Me, which I'd